Perfect. Good afternoon. Welcome to our session, Intelligent Approaches to Smart Factories. We really appreciate the time that you're all taking. I know that it is a busy time in Barcelona. We were probably all out last evening. Hopefully we're all having a terrific time. I am Mark Cavalier. I'm a managing director at Deloitte and a research leader in the firm, where we have been studying and deploying smart factories across a variety of environments for the last several years. I could not be more excited about the panelists that we have today. Up here on stage we have representation across a number of different geographic regions, from Europe to Asia to the United States, a number of different industries, and a great variety of perspectives. I've had the opportunity to speak with Honest and Christine and Josh and Stephen over the last few days about this topic, and it's just been a terrific conversation, so we're hoping to have another one for you all here today. As we get started, I wanted to begin where we left off in our discussion during the keynote which opened the conference yesterday. This was one of the key slides that we showed, and I'm not sure how many of you had the opportunity to join that presentation, but this slide represented the analysis from a survey of 9,500 individuals, a man on the street, if you will, or a woman on the street, if you will, and their views towards technology, their positivity towards technology. And what we saw yesterday and what we talked about was the broad range of feelings of positivity and sometimes negativity that people have about technology. These are the people that we are asking to adopt, to appropriate, to use technology in our smart factory deployments. And the reason I brought the slide up is because as we talked about these results in the panel today, and we went through the list of technologies that we have up here, we thought every one of these is something that we will see deployed in a smart factory environment sometime in the next several years. And so it seemed relevant that we think about it. Now, before we turn to the panel, I wanted to share data from another study. This is US data, so I'm going to admit that, but we still thought that it was incredibly relevant to the discussion that we're having today. So this is data from a survey of about 700 senior executives, so not a man on the street, but senior executives making smart factory investment decisions across the United States. And it's really broken into three parts. On the right-hand side of the slide, we see some stats. 86% of the respondents that we spoke with claimed that smart factory will be a critical driver of competitiveness in the next 5 years. 86%. 83% claim that smart factory technology will change the way we produce products in the next 5 years. And the value of smart factory doesn't seem to be in doubt. So on the right upper side of this slide, what we see is data, and I think, and we'll ask our panelists about this, but these are numbers that I actually believe based on the experience that I have seen these deployments take off. For a $4 billion company, it looks like over the course of 10 years, you can generate somewhere in the range of $1.7 billion worth of additional value through smart factory as a combination of growth and productivity improvement. So we're seeing real value, real results in the smart factory deployments that we're doing. But here's the shocking part to me, and that comes across the bottom. In the face of a view that says that smart factory will be critical to competitiveness and to production, we find that nearly 2/3 of the companies that we talk to haven't even begun. 19% haven't even thought about how to begin on smart factory. Now that begs a huge question. Why? Our view is that implementing smart factory is a seemingly complicated endeavor. And so in order to answer the question of what is the challenge that we face, we have embarked on a recent study where we have been interviewing in depth smart factory implementers, both from a Deloitte side and from the perspective of our clients that are engaged in this on a day-to-day basis. And we have come up with, and an executive summary of this, by the way, is available at this website on the bottom here, so you can see the executive summary. The full report will be published sometime in January. But essentially, we have framed our findings in the context of two dimensions, what we call the old and the nuanced. And the old really refers to those lessons that we have learned over 30 years of pursuing transformations of all kinds, whether that's ERP or re-engineering or more process-oriented implementations. What are those things that we need to remember and continue to focus on regardless of context? And then we get to the nuance. That is, what are those nuances that we have seen arise from the context of smart factory deployment? Now, I'm not going to walk through these individually. You can read about our perspective or our emerging perspective on this in the executive summary. You can read about it in the report when we get to January. But instead, what I'd like to do is turn to our panelists. So we have Anis, Christine, Josh, and Stephen, and bring the conversation to them and see what their perspective is on this. And if we have time at the end, we'll ask you for questions. Does that seem reasonable? Yes? Excellent. Excellent. So Stephen, I think I'd like to start with you. Maybe you can share with us your perspective on what you see happening out there in the land of smart factory, and then we'll sort of dig into the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Mark. You know, when we work with our customers and our clients as it relates to their smart factory journey, what we're learning is very consistent with the results of the study. Many of the challenges, many of the complications aren't necessarily new. We're looking to solve for improved productivity, right? So that takes the forms of increased throughput or yield or availability. We're looking to help our clients and customers grow. Those aren't new challenge. Those are not new kind of focus areas for us. We're finding a new set of technologies, and there's something really important in that because the technologies are accelerating at a very rapid pace. We see that in all of our daily jobs. We see that at conferences such as this, that there's an acceleration of what is possible. Where we see the most success coming from smart factory deployments versus ones that are less successful really comes down to a couple key focus areas. The first one is value, and an almost obsessive focus on value. We can point the technologies to a lot of different things, but how do we point that to the areas in an organization that are going to be most impactful? That's important for rallying the organization behind you and having a good way for measuring your success on the journey. The second thing really comes down to the change management journey, and that is a really important characteristic of bringing people with you right from day one in terms of how that smart factory solution is going to be deployed. And so those are two characteristics of where we see the most successful deployments. The ones that don't go as well generally revolve around a focus on just the technology. And one of the things that we like to talk about, and I believe you're going to hear this from a number of the panelists today, is a shift away from a proof of concept, but rather to focus on what we refer to as a proof of value. And it's not meant to diminish the importance of the technology, because there's a lot of hard stuff that has to be done to make much of that work. But it rather focuses it on the value that you're looking to achieve, how you get that out of the organization, and how you bring everybody on the journey.
Perfect, thanks, Stephen. Anis, you are the Vice President of Digital Transformation at Airbus, let's call that a significant company deep into the smart factory journey. Could you, Stephen just talked about value or proof of value. Could you talk just for a couple of minutes about what it is you're trying to accomplish with Smart Factory at Airbus, and then maybe focus a little bit on the concept of value. So when we look across these, as Stephen suggested, we often see that companies adopt a North Star, a value objective. Could you talk about what's going on in that space at Airbus?
Yeah, sure. Maybe in the beginning, I would not differentiate between a kind of smart factories and the dumb factories. What we are trying to do is actually also to enable our people to do the job. And what we see today, it's especially if you take a look in our industry, which is aerospace, we have still high level of the manual work, and actually at the core of the success are people. So what we see today is that these people are having a lot of routine tasks like playing with different ERP systems, getting the data out and everything else. So many of their time is actually non-value added time. So we started the whole digital journey with the topic, how can we actually reduce the bias or the pressure that we are having on the normal operators, and let them do actually the job we are paying for, which is making planes and not making reports in 10 different ERP systems. So this fits also quite well with I think your results, that this time we have to start with the personas, with the people that are working in different roles on the shop floor, and ask ourselves also how can we deliver the value for them. Because what's funny also this time, in the past, if you want to deploy the new technology on the shop floor, the new tools, and there are a lot of tools, it was always like a central function, defining the tool, working for 3 years on the tool, then going for 2 days, doing the impact analysis and rolling out the tool. And the acceptance rate also was really low, and we find out that despite all of these tools, the people are still people and still trying to help each other. So the journey this time was starting with the people, asking them what is really the pain, and how can we help them deal with the pain, and actually ensuring also that they are getting the right information on the right time to make the right decision, and not just doing a kind of buzziness in the smartness, because these are the guys that are knowing the problem, and in many cases they know the solution. So if we can empower them with the right technology, and more than that, with the right data, it is really important. And what we see as well, or what we don't see, are this kind of OT, IT, I would call it even religious wars, because this time we are not really starting with the technology and 10 years of the roadmaps. This time we are starting from the value, as you mentioned, Stefan, and value and the use case, and then we will figure out also how to bring the technology into it.
Terrific. Christine, you rose in, I mean, you lead digital factory transformation for Pactiv. You rose to that position through let's call it a people route, and I'm not counting words here, but I think the word people has already been used in the first 10 minutes of this conversation, probably 10 or more times. So I'm wondering, can you introduce Pactiv to our audience, and so talk a little bit about what Pactiv does, and then as we think about people, I'm particularly interested in hearing about, we'll get to the people on the shop floor that are being asked to use this, but you've also got to build a deployment team, right? Could you talk about how you've thought about that at Pactiv? So Pactiv first, then the deployment team.
Sure. So Pactiv is a large manufacturing organization across the U.S. and they have a few sites outside of the U.S. and we manufacture disposable containers for food and beverages and across fast food industries and various businesses such as that. And when we went and started our journey down this smart factory, we had to take a look and see who from our organization could come together and actually be able to have the folks across all the manufacturing organization feel committed to the program and find leaders who are already standing in the organization and have that level of commitment from folks at all levels. So looking at top leaders all the way through to folks in the manufacturing situation out working on the floor, and those outside of that as well, and warehousing and whatnot, and find leaders who are very knowledgeable of our organization, our business, how it runs, and then has a commitment to where we want to take it. And so we looked at that and took a step back at identifying folks who were actually in roles in some of the manufacturing facilities now, who are seen as leaders and up-and-coming folks, and built our team out of those. So one of the individuals who's key on our team doing deployments used to be one of the operators on the equipment. So he was one of actually ran one of the lines and had a couple different roles where he was a safety floor lead and different positions like that. And we knew that he was someone folks could listen to and believe. And so we had him join the team, and he travels all over with us. And it's amazing that having someone that they can relate to really builds that buy-in to what we're trying to go down.
Yeah, I'm going to follow up on this just because you're bringing back memories. I started my career in ERP implementation. I wrote my thesis on ERP implementation, and one of the prescriptions always was pull your best people out of the organization to work on the deployment. And that's a great theory. Nobody wants to give up their best person to your project. So is that?
Sure.
Are we seeing that? How are you dealing
Yeah.
with that, or is it just like do the best you can? What's your view on that?
Well, I will say all of us played dual roles in the beginning. So we took this pretty small and slow and a focused approach, and all of us kind of played a couple different roles at the same time because we did have to find those next level of leaders who could fill in for where we were at. But as you go and you do a deployment, you need to find those folks who are very similar to our team, who reside within the manufacturing floor and can be champions there. And it really kind of takes training and building the talent that you have to the next level, because you're really building sub-teams throughout the entire organization for this deployment.
Terrific, thank you. Josh, first of all, I want to thank you. You came all the way from Japan to sit with us on this panel, so we really appreciate it. You are the Chief Strategist for Digital Service Technology for Toshiba, a very advanced company. Toshiba is a partner of ours as we go to market on Smart Factory. I'm wondering if you could comment from your perspective on a different kind of people, and those are ecosystem partners. So the variety of technologies and services that you need to bring that an organization needs to bring to bear in order to progress on a smart factory journey. How do you guys think about that? How does that all get coordinated?
Yes, I'd like to share a couple examples. For the first example, would be one of the world's largest semiconductor factory in Yokkaichi, Japan. Uh, Nowadays, the product manufacturing memory devices are require uh, over 200 different types of 15,000 processes and uh, 100 different types of 5,000 equipments. It's a big numbers. And the biggest challenge, one of the biggest challenges is to improve the yield and but it's not realistic to analyze those data and so identify the problem of the low yield because there's a 2 billion data from those processes and machines every single day. So you can't do that without any IT or AI technologies. So we introduced our AI technologies to find out what the reason of the low yield. So and we can achieve that the rapid improvement of the yield rate. And the second one is a Japanese automotive parts manufacturer, and they have a 130 factories over 6 countries, and their problem was the productivity. Although Japanese automotive maker represented by Toyota, they are very good at the high productivity, like Kaizen activities. But still, they need to improve the productivity. So it's very difficult to analyze the conventional way. So we introduced the digital twin approaches, and we collect data from the factories, like a man and method and measures or materials and even the environment, the temperature and the humidity or something like that. So and we constructed an integrated data model so to copy the physical entity of the factory, and you can record all the activity like video recorded by the dashboard camera, so you can look back into the what was happening for the low productivity, what caused the low productivity, and which point we can enhance or improve. So that makes 30% of productivity improvement. So all that can be established by a good partnership with strategic partnership like Deloitte, and we have a very long relationship with Direct Japan Direct team, and we also have a technological partnership like cloud vendors or mobile vendors and ERP vendors and so on. And one more thing I have to enhance is you mentioned the IT and OT conflict, but actually when we constructed the integrated data model, it was very important to talk with the OT guys, and especially our corporate manufacturing engineering center. They have been accumulated many experiences and body of knowledge through the long history of the manufacturing. So that helps our integrated data model to to enhance the data model was very helpful. So we have to make the good ecosystem with IT and OT people.
Stephen, I want to come to you on this ecosystem conversation as well. One of the things that struck me looking across the wide variety of deployments that we've seen is that there's often a need for, I think of it as a coach. That's the word that my word, not maybe an industry word, who's coordinating with all the different players in the ecosystem. Some of those are ad hoc, some of those are partners of long standing. Any thoughts on how, who, when what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, it's an interesting challenge because we're in a period of time now where a lot of the technologies, and we can kind of start to rattle them off. We see many of them in the hall here. Things like video analytics, the entire cognitive tool set in terms of how we apply artificial intelligence to some of the challenges that we have, really starts to become quite complex. Right? And so this is really something we tend to think about in two ways. One is that it's very difficult to create a roadmap on day one and say, well, here's the value that we're going to create in each one of these areas, and here's how we're going to do it, and here's the exact set of not only capabilities that we need, but also partnerships that we need to get there. So having a flexible approach as it relates to kind of painting that North Star, if you will, or kind of painting that picture of what the future could look like, and then having a highly adaptable process that you can execute along the way. That's a critical component. We've seen a number of our customers use something that they call the digital foundry to kind of promote that not only ideation but also the governance of many of their digital initiatives to keep it focused on value, but then also provide a forum that allows for that flexibility as the programs evolve.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't know if our colleague Chris Barnes is in the room. Maybe Chris, you want to stand up and yell. He's a great example of someone, at least on our team, who I've seen. He'd come up to me like several times saying, oh, look at this cool thing, look at that cool thing, this is going to be great, and trying to figure out how to coordinate it all. It gets us to me, though, to the topic of infrastructure, because if we're going to deploy many of these, whether they're sensors or other kinds of technologies on the shop floor, they've got to be able to communicate with us. And shop floors, one of the things that's exciting to me about shop floors is there's so much going on. But that means that they can often be noisy, audibly noisy, but also electromagnetically noisy. And issues of connectivity seem to propagate across lots of environments. So, honestly, I want to come to you. I'm certainly happy to hear from the rest of you, but I want to come to you and get your view on what are the challenges you have seen deploying infrastructure, and particularly related to connectivity, and pulling that data out and pushing it back in where we're making a decision. What are the issues and how are you approaching them with respect to the infrastructure in the smart factory?
Maybe if I just may give a quick comment on ecosystem building, because I think we learned a lot in this one, especially also when you're in the beginning of the journey, so kind of 3 years ago in our case. It's the question of who's talking to whom and what is a kind of framework. So what we did, this is a kind of our learning. We said, if you want, to cheer your supplier ecosystem, so who are the best guys to talk with the suppliers? We thought purchasing guys. So we let our purchasing guys speaking with the suppliers, and we learned that these kind of relationships are not really the creative relationships. So basically we decided also to have different setup of guys speaking with the other guys. And the second topic also that we learned in the past, also when we spoke with the partners, the second sentence was IP. And this IP story was actually also killing any kind of creative brainstorming or building something together. And what we learned in that journey is all about basically creating the joint value. And if we can create the joint value with the ecosystem partner, at some point of time we will figure out how to solve the IP topic, because I think the ideas are cheap today. The execution is actually what it counts, and when we come into the execution phase, we can really kind of do our sharing, so who's in charge also for what. And coming back also to your question about infrastructure, this is a big question for us. Because if you come to see us, we have even the people working within the parts with the tools. Getting the data and having the full coverage in that area is really a big pain. But what we see, it's a kind of paradigm change. We try to avoid a kind of boiling the ocean approach, which is deploy all the networks, all the precision on all sides, and we will see also how the business value is going to come. What we are learning is that mostly, I think 90% of data are actually waste because they are not used also in time, and they're just generated also for the generation purpose. And the learning also that we have is actually, if we pick in the beginning a lot of data which are already there. A typical example are the log files in the smart tools or log files in the big machines, where even the guys, the operators, were not really aware of what is in the machines. Because when you're coming also from this kind of conglomerate background, you're going for a kind of functional ordering of your machines, and not really on a kind of data-oriented ordering. And just that step is bringing really significant productivity improvements without going into a kind of pushing the big stones in the organization. And then what we learned is when the use case is there, and when we find a kind of pivot to the use case, then we go fully accelerated for the deployment of the architecture and the networks.
That's funny. I see someone smiling in the front rows here. So you must have hit a chord. Christina, I also saw you nodding.
Yeah.
Do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So our first deployment was we tried to connect up everything possible. So we were in a facility that had 18 manufacturing lines, tried to connect everything possible. Quickly learned that actually doesn't drive the most value. And so our approaches from that is to really hone into what data we're pulling in drives the most value, and focus that as our approach. And I think that's made the deployments go quicker, and we've been able to see that value turn around a lot faster from the folks.
Josh, Anis was talking about log files and what's already in the machine, and that's terrific for a machine that is digitally enabled, wired, capable of generating a log file. But there is equipment on shop floors, that goes all the way back to the post-war era, if not before. And I mean, everyone now in the audience has a picture in their mind of what that machine is in their life, right? And we love them. They're fully depreciated, they're turning out. We figured out how to work them, but they still need to be part of this too. So, can you talk a little bit about your experiences or Toshiba's experiences with, let's call it, legacy equipment?
Yes. I can share a case we are doing with the semiconductor factory. It's not the same factory, but they need to labor saving for checking and maintenance of their aged equipment. But there are many analog devices like the dial meters, the level meters, or something like that. So we install the AGVs and the drones with the cameras and have them shoot the image of the meter. And we also install the gateway, IoT gateway, which with the help of the image recognition AI, read the value of those meters. And that can be collect the data from those old aged apparatus and gather into our integrated data model. And so that enables the labor saving very quickly.
Stephen, I want to be sensitive to time, but we're doing, and you in particular have done a lot with vision systems on analog equipment. Can you just give us 60 seconds of your view on the role? And
Yeah, absolutely. And I noted that, kind of as I walked around the hall earlier here today, that there's a lot of applications that we see out there for vision analytics. Many of the examples that we see here today are focused on a person, right? So how do you assess kind of what a person looks like? What is their intent? What is their gaze? Potentially are they making hostile motions? Those sorts of things. In our experience, applying those very same algorithms to the manufacturing shop floor, we're able to learn more about particular assets, especially kind of the post-war, kind of difficult to connect, or maybe not economically feasible to connect type assets, where we can now monitor productivity in a way using a video stream and analytics that are detecting certain things in that video stream in a way that we couldn't before. Now, the great thing about that is it's highly repeatable, right? So once you've developed that solution, that could be scaled very, very, very quickly. But they can also be applied to, hey, I've got a tough to network or a remote asset that has a bunch of analog gauges. There's no reason why those same vision analytics capabilities aren't pointed towards a control panel. We've done that a number of times, both in diagnostics and in permanent solutions.
Christina, I want to come back to you. So we've been talking about the shop floor and getting the technology deployed. Honest, I think, talked about, when you throw the switch. This is, the post-deployment period to me is again one of those things that we've been talking about for a long time, but it still seems like we struggle as organizations to accept the fact that the day that we cut over is not the end of the project. In many senses, it's the beginning of the project. Could you talk about your experience at Pactiv and how you're addressing that?
So after, we would always have a kind of phased approach. We would do a deployment, and then there was a set period of time where we were working hand in hand with the folks who were using the tools to ensure that they understood, it was driving their value to them personally. And then we'd do that for a period of time. Then we kind of step back for maybe a couple days, maybe a week, and then go back in again and kind of watch from afar. And I think, we continuously will do that, monitor the system, provide little bits of feedback to the folks who are the leaders within the manufacturing plant, and tidbits on how to use the system a little bit better, maybe where they're missing an opportunity to gain some value or some insight, and continue to have those touch points. So we never actually let go completely, because we're all in it together and we have to drive that value, and you want to build the champions who are then going to spread that message to the other manufacturing facilities where we haven't hit yet, and have them be asking for us to come and know that it's not just something that's going to be plopped into the plant and they're left to try and do it on their own. We're fully committed to be there to support through the entire process, and that this is equipment, it's a commitment from everyone. It's not just a drop in and walk away.
Do you see that post-deployment period and the support in that is that something you would recommend be part of a formal project plan, or is that something that you're reacting to?
No, I think it's completely a part of it. And so something that Anis brought up earlier was pain points, talking about, and where are the struggles within the plant. And that's one of the first initial things we do when we go into a plant, is we pull in a team of folks and just have them spill it all out. What's their greatest struggles? Where do they wish they had more information? How can we provide them help for where they feel pain? And so they immediately feel like they're a part of it. They've given guidance on to how we're going to help them. And so you start from that phase, and then you go all the way through and continue to touch point with them afterwards and say, okay, where are those pain points now? Have they gone from a 10 down to a 2? Where are we at, and where do we maybe need to come back in and touch on something again?
Okay. We have about 7 minutes left, and I've referenced this work that we're doing, this research that we're doing, where we're talking to people that are involved in the deployment process. The last question that we always ask is, I think of it as our soapbox moment. So you have invested this time, this effort, this emotion into smart factory deployment. We have this audience. I've had my questions, but I may not have hit on that single crystalline point that you would have everybody know. So I'd like to go just right down the line, starting with you, Anis, and say, you got one thing. You got 90 seconds. You're on the soapbox. What is the message that you think that the folks in this room self-selected because they're interested in smart factory, we presume? What is the message that you think they need to get walking out of here?
Well, I have a couple of them, but I will try to be
Get one.
instead.
No.
I think that the key one is empowering the frontline guys. Because these guys need to be empowered to solve the problems, because they are the guys who know what is the problem, and in 80% of the cases, they are the guys who know the solution. So it's not these are not the guys in the hierarchies in between. So if we can empower the guys who are in the front line, we will have even more than 30% productivity improvement. And what is interesting from my perspective is these guys are demographically better set up for the digital transformation than the white collars. So.
Okay, terrific. Christine?
I would leverage those folks.
What's it?
So you're leveraging those
Yeah.
folks that you're empowering, I think, is one of the number one. And so identifying a key person within the manufacturing team who's the champion. That's critical, because they can sell anything you're trying to put in place much better than any of us can.
Is there a way that you have to, I'm just curious, is there, because now I'm thinking about that person who's coming from the shop floor, and them it's clear to me how they get the attention of the other folks on the shop floor. Any issues with getting the attention or the respect of moving up the chain, or?
So surprisingly, we did not have an issue with that. So we do town halls every quarter, and without any type of pushing from our team, one of the business leaders identified one of the champions that had been one of our plants and had highlighted them in front of the entire corporation. So it's become natural. You know, they've been identified. We didn't have to push that.
Terrific. Josh, what's your soapbox moment?
Yes. I'd like to say that the deploying smart factory is not a factory. It's not necessary for factory itself only. You know, we have to care about the interoperability among the factories, or even other IoT services. Also, I think the real benefit of smart factory lies around there.
Terrific. Stephen, I'm going to come to you in just 1 second, but I want to note for the audience that we're probably going to have about 2 minutes, depending on how long Stephen talks. It can go on for a while, but we're going to probably have about 2 minutes. So if anyone has a question that they're thinking about asking, we'll be glad to take it. But Stephen, I'm going to give it to you. What's the soapbox critical message that you think is important here?
I would really highlight two things, and I think you would have heard some of this from many of the panelists already, but I want to put some emphasis on them. The point Josh just made here in terms of it's not just focusing in the factory, it's starting to connect that data that exists across your enterprise, across your supply chain, upstream and downstream. I think in almost all the cases where we've seen dramatic improvements in either productivity or in the ability to unlock capacity using that data, it has been by taking data that already existed in the manufacturing, in those machines, right, and combining it with data from across our enterprise. And technically that can be challenging sometimes, but at the end of the day, we're still solving for those same problems, but we've got to do it with a much richer data set, and that's a really important feature. The second thing that I would kind of highlight is that many of the tools, many of the training curriculums that we've developed over time that are focused on how we solve these problems in manufacturing, those are still all highly relevant. Those aren't being replaced by digital solutions. They are, in some ways, being augmented, or they are being now provided with additional data at a much higher frequency or much granular data that we previously couldn't see before. And that is providing a new source of information, a new source of inspiration in some cases for your team members that are already trained in a lot of those problem solving and continuous improvement type skills.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from the audience? Anyone want to ask a question? No? Okay, so then I'm going to ask one final question. It's something that came up actually in our little green room before we were talking, and maybe, honest, I'll throw this to you, but then invite anyone to ask. When we looked at the data from the keynote yesterday, The slide that I didn't show from yesterday is the one that illustrated dramatic differences in positivity across countries. As we look across countries or regions or cultural differences, how does that color the smart factory journey, or does it?
Well, I think since I'm German and I remember the curve yesterday,
Yep.
it was not really a positive curve for German. So the openness for new technology, so it was not really so high. What we see is, as a global company, we have to consider different other cultural aspects and what is happening in the surroundings of these people. For example, we have production facilities in China, where we are basically dealing with the workforce, which is used to face recognition, or they're used to sharing the data, using even AI actually to solve the problems. On the other side, we have the workforce, and we have colleagues also in Europe, where the GDPR data protection is the big topic. So I think the challenge there is actually to find a global approach to deal with this on a corporate level, being and relying still on ethical and compliance values that we are standing for.
Perfect. Anyone else want to add to that?
I want to say education. So I think that there's still probably a gap within many of our facilities, truly understanding the whole outlook of where this technology can go and how it impacts folks and really what they're doing.
Terrific. Okay. Well, then I think we're out of time. I'd first like to thank the audience for your attention. You have lots of choices of where you could be. We appreciate the fact that you spent this time with us. So we are grateful for that. And to my colleagues up here, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure working with you on this, and I'm looking forward to continuing that journey together. So thank you. Thank you all.